Friends, Jeff here with a new episode of Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. Today we welcome as a guest on the show Matthias Alder. Matthias is the CEO of Gain Therapeutics. And this conversation is really unique in the sense that just a few months ago, we had as a guest on the show Matthias's predecessor, Eric Richmond. And in this conversation, we get to dive into the handing of the baton from one CEO to the next. And to hear, given that unique situation, Matthias's perspective on his role and how he sees himself in the seat after a career in the life sciences and now finding himself as CEO. Who Matthias is to me is warmth and reassurance. Just listening to Matthias talk and to feel his presence in this conversation brings me a sense of reassurance. And I think you'll have a similar experience. So sit back and enjoy this conversation with Matthias Alder. Matthias Alder, it is so wonderful to have you here. As I was just sharing with you before we started recording, I feel connected with you in some interesting ways, but I've been excited for this time together. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jeff. A real pleasure to be here. Really enjoyed our conversations leading up to what we're about to talk about, and so there's a lot of good conversation to be had around the topic of leadership and what people don't talk about that I think are going to be interesting, I hope, to your listeners.
Yeah. So I just did a brief introduction of who you are to me. Would love for you to share with us what you're up to in the world.
Right. Yeah. So I, as you've heard in the introduction, I just recently took over as the CEO of Gain Therapeutics. I had been with the company for a year as in a chief operating officer role. So in some ways, it was a very seamless change, but there's now being in seat. There's now new things that are coming my way that I hadn't fully appreciated before. And so there's nothing like actually being there and having to do it to really get you the full sense of of what's going on. And so it's been a good transition, and I'm looking forward to just sharing with you some of my experiences now that I've had, and so how I came to where I am today.
Yeah, and some of our listeners may you saying Gain Therapeutics might ring a bell, and for those that happened, you're right. So we introduced, or we had as a guest your predecessor, Eric Richmond, and which that's a first for the show. So that just opens up lots of possibilities for our conversation.
Right.
Personally, with what is going on at Gain, what are you most excited about right now?
It's really the same reason, the same basis for why I'm excited now is why I joined the company to begin with. So Gain is a computational drug discovery company, which is a field that now just has to come of age, so to speak. And it's an exciting field in that we are now applying the computer technologies, software programming, machine learning, and so forth, to drug discovery. So the intersection between the tech side and the biotech side is really exciting and has really creates incredible opportunities for accelerating the speed with which we can develop therapeutics that are ultimately going to benefit patients. And so being in that field is really exciting because it's sort of an up and coming field right now. And being able to help drive and shape the company in this environment is a great spot to be in.
Mm. And these are two areas that operations around in life science and technology, these aren't where you began. This is where you are now. And
right.
And your journey started in law, in the legal field.
Right.
And if I'm remembering correctly, the entry point to strategic operations was when you took responsibility in a past role by through the HR function. I'm wondering, in your journey, when did you have the sense that maybe you said it to yourself, maybe you said it to your wife, or you just had the thought, I can run a company?
It's a great question. And it's actually, it's not obviously something just looking back now, right? So there's an arc of a career. You know, I started out as a junior lawyer in a big pharmaceutical, in legal department of a big pharmaceutical company. And so it was thinking that at someday I would be sitting in a CEO seat of a US publicly traded biotech company. It's just not something you think about or plan for.
Yeah.
And so it really has been sort of that evolution, right? Over time, and the way I've looked at sort of my career, it's really an arc, right? You're starting to start somewhere and move on to develop based on your interests and capabilities. And every time I made a sort of a job change, it was taking what I've known and expanding it into a new field or a new area, and stepping up and gaining experience over time. And so it took me really, at my last job before Gain Therapeutics, was as the chief business officer at a CAR-T company that was based in London. And there I had responsibility, as I had in prior companies, for business development and human resources and IP and other areas of the business. And so the experience really has sort of built, right? Once you move from law into companies, you build out, or I've built out a series of experiences in different companies, learning as I was doing a job, and again making a job change, and then building on what I've learned. And so I was at Autolos until September of this past year. But as I had been at the company for 4 years, I had in the functions that I was responsible for, I've been fortunate enough to have very capable leaders that I was working with and building up over that time period. And in the end, there was not much left for me to do because they were doing a job that needed doing. And so I felt like, okay, this is no longer a place where I can really make a meaningful impact. And so I was looking for a new role. And as I was scouting about, talking with friends and people in the network and former colleagues, and so I say, well, I'm looking for a chief business officer role. And they were saying, why don't you think bigger? And it was really these conversations then that led me to think, yeah, actually, I think I could probably do it, right? And then had the conversation now also through sort of a network introduction with Eric Richmond, started in sort of middle of last year. And he was looking for somebody who could eventually take over from him in the CEO role. And so I was looking for a COO, anticipating an eventual change. And it was almost the ideal situation for me to get sort of my feet on the ground, get to know the company, working very closely with the team members here, getting to know the platform, the technology, our programs, a new therapeutic area that I've gotten into here at Gain in neurodegenerative diseases. And so it was a great period to get fully acquainted with the organization, and then very seamlessly stepping into the role. And the longer I was in the role, I did feel like, okay, now I know I can do it. And so the confidence, the push came from colleagues and friends who said, I think I see you as in that role, even if I didn't see myself there immediately. But then over time, I think I got used to that.
Isn't that an amazing thing? I'm experiencing something similar on the physical side. I'm training for something, but isn't it so interesting how we sometimes don't see it or think about it in our own mind, but others see it in us, as you just reflected. Your colleagues saw the you being in the CEO seat and to think about that. Where else in your life throughout where has it been where someone else has seen greatness or the possibility of more in you that you didn't necessarily see in yourself?
Yeah, it's really wonderful to sort of reminisce and think back sort of at the forks in the road that we've encountered, and sort of something probably similar was I was actually when I was a student in law school in Switzerland, and didn't really get the traction, and I felt like maybe I should just go do something else. Right, I was about to jump off, and then I had a conversation with a family friend who herself was a lawyer, and she said, "Why don't you stick with it? Just take this next step, this next round of exams, and then make a decision. Because if you leave now, you never know, right, what would have happened." And so that sort of convinced me to push through. And from there on, it's sort of the rest is history, right? And so here I am, 20, 30 years later, in this role now. And so it's really important, I think, in life, right, to have good connections with people in the family, around the family, friends, colleagues, to really point out things that you don't see yourself. I mean, if you're really in it, right, and you see yourself in a certain way, and it's very few people have a vision for themselves about where they think they should be going. I think it's often the external influences and supports that we're getting from others that push us to that next step. And I think that's very fun to think back. And I was recently at an event, so I met actually that person. I said, "Look, it's thanks to you that I'm here today." And she was like, "Oh, that's nice." And then somebody else came up to me and said, "You had this conversation with my son. He was in law school, and it was exactly the same thing." I said, "Look, you should do that, and you could move along." And now he is a lawyer and is very happy in what he's doing. And so it's, again, I didn't actually remember the conversation, but it was like, you don't often know the impact that you have on other people.
Yeah, what a gift for someone to see something in us,
Yeah,
in you, that we can't see ourselves. And then there's a step there that I'm sensing as well, is then to trust that person. So it's one thing that person could speak into our lives and see in us something great, but it's another thing for us to trust that person and say, "I don't see it, but I'm going to believe you, and I'm going to take that step." That's a real risk.
I think it obviously it takes also a bit of initiative and willingness, right, to embrace things and take risks, right. I'm thinking about sort of the my career progression and the changes I've made. And so I was a lawyer in-house at a big pharma company in Switzerland. I moved across the Atlantic into the US and joined a law firm, right? So that was a big change on that side. And then after several years at the firm, moving from a firm environment where I knew exactly what I was doing into becoming the general counsel of a publicly traded company in the US again. That was like, every time you take a risk, but you can, you just need to build up the confidence in what you already know. That gives you that sense of, I can probably stretch it, right? And that willingness to stretch it and expand and continuously acquire new experiences, I think, is sort of to me, one of the keys to success, really.
Yeah. And while you met Eric and had these conversations and put you in a good spot to be in the role where you ultimately are, I would imagine that you are discovering and experiencing things that you couldn't even have predicted until you're in the role. I mean, you've been in and around the C-suite for many years. I'm wondering, what are some of those things that you're experiencing and learning that have been, we'll call them, surprises?
Right. Well, I think it's there's nothing like actually taking on a new role and new responsibilities to bring home sort of the reality of what it actually means to have that responsibility and take and fulfill that function in an organization. And one of the things I've been, as you mentioned, in the C-suite for many years now, and working with many different CEOs along the way, and always thinking, God, why is he doing that? I would do it so much differently, right? But now being in seat, you're sort of realizing, okay, these are actually dynamics at play that you have to manage as a CEO. And it's not just managing people in the organization and making sure, people do their jobs and, making sure the team works together and all that organizational sort of interactions. It's then a dynamic also with the board, who has a different role to play, right? And then being the driver and the interface between the board and the company, I think is a dynamic I knew existed, but again, there's nothing like actually being there and having to deal with it and work with board members and making sure that they get the information that they rightfully need, right? And at the same time, making sure that as an organization, we develop that information and bring it all together, and being that link, I think is been eye-opening, shall we say. It's not like, surprising in a way that I knew it had to happen, but actually having to do it, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and I have to imagine having Eric, because Eric is still in the mix, he's still on the board.
Yes.
I have to imagine that having that relationship with Eric and that advocate, even like he knows what you're going through,
Right.
so he's not just the one making the request as a board member,
Right.
but he sat in your seat and was receiving those requests and having that being in that role for many years. How has that been in that relationship? How has that been a real gift for you?
It really has, as you just said, a gift and a very unique situation, in that, often in companies, the board makes a decision, we need to make a change with the CEO. And so they make the change. And then there is a bit of could be a friction between the new person and the existing CEO. This is nothing like it in our situation, because Eric and I have been working closely together now for a year. And it's been a wonderful working relationship, very supportive one of each other, and always knowing that eventually, I was going to step into his role. And so it's evolved in that now he's no longer the CEO and he's on the board. But as you said, he knows exactly what's going on. He's very deep in the company and still understands everything that is going on with the programs, the activities, the characters. And he's very supportive, right? I have almost daily conversations with him, and he's a great mentor also on working with the board in an effective manner. And I rely on his advice and counsel on a daily basis.
And again, when I said it at the very beginning of our conversation, this is a unique opportunity for me, because this is the first time that I've been able to have as guests both the prior CEO and the current CEO. And I'm curious about while the two of you are still working very closely together, as you just said, almost daily touch points, the handing of the baton. And how are you looking, and it's still very new, so I recognize that, but how are you thinking about putting your unique stamp in how the company is led, as successful and as good? Let's just say that as the things were left for you from Eric. How are you thinking about putting your own stamp on things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the way I think about how things have developed, I think we are at Gain in a very unique position where this was a very planned transition, and I had sort of a year's worth of time to really fully work myself into the organization. And so it's not like I'm coming in here to say, oh, we need to do everything differently. Because I've already had a hand in shaping the company to the point of where we are today. And so in that sense, it was a very seamless transition, me just stepping into the CEO role. It also helps that I think from just a character perspective, and you may have noticed that too in your conversation with Eric, we're actually very similar. So there's not a big difference in terms of how we like to work with people and what we think is important in being a leader in an organization. And so I think also from that perspective, it's been very seamless and should have been very seamless for the organization. And going forward, one of the things that in the conversations leading up to me taking the job at Gain, the conversations I had with my colleagues and people in my network, is just the realization that I've been in the biotech industry and the pharma industry now for more than 25 years. And so there is a certain sense of, okay, I've sort of seen it, I've done many things. There's not a lot that can really surprise me. And so having that sense of calm, even if things are hectic and, new developments happen, understanding, being able to put it in perspective very quickly and just managing through things is I have that sense of just, how should I describe that? In sports, people talk about when you're really experienced, at a quarterback in a football team, right? If you're really experienced, the game slows down, right? And you see things developing and you're able to react as if it's in slow motion, even if it happens real time, really fast. And that's sort of how I see where I am today and how I view myself in the company and what I can bring in terms of leading the company through potentially turbulent times that may come at some point in the future. And so it's that sense of certainty, assuredness that I can handle it. That gives me the ability to really step back and focus on what's really important and not get stressed out about the stuff that doesn't matter. And just being able to have that sense of clarity of purpose, I think is really important, and imparting that also on the rest of the organization.
There's a phrase I use that I'm really getting a sense I think applies here for you, is at the stage of your career, you have nothing to hide, nothing to fear, nothing to prove. And as a result, I just have the sense there's a relaxedness, not lackadaisical, but just there's a relaxed disposition of where you're at, and that's what allows you to have a comfort level of where things are, how things were handed to you. Nothing to hide, nothing to fear, nothing to prove. Does that feel like where you're at?
Very much. Right. In a way, I know I can do it. I have, just looking around, most people have less experience than I have. And so it's like, okay, let's work together, right? We know what needs to be done. And really leading from that sort of a resting pole, right? There is that sense of calmness that I have inside me that lets me be the leader I think that I need to be for the company, and really working with the team. And I have the luck really of working with a management team that's also very experienced and has that same kind of mindset, right? None of us have anything left to prove. We're here because we see a huge opportunity, because we think we can make an impact, because we want to move forward our program in Parkinson's disease that has the potential to be disease modifying and making a real difference in patients' lives, right? We can be at the cutting edge of drug discovery with our platform. And so the sense of purpose and drive that I have and that we have as a team is really looking at what we have and doing the best with it, knowing that we have the experience and the ability to do so.
Yeah, and I can imagine as well, Matthias, that the axiom that I often hear from CEOs, that leadership is lonely, that actually doesn't apply for you. That leadership isn't lonely. This seat that you're in is not lonely because for all the factors with Eric on the board and this experienced group of team members on your executive team, colleagues who are supporting you and encouraging you. Is it right to say that for you, leadership, the role of CEO actually is not lonely?
Spot on. And as you said, right, when you read sort of these leadership books, right, it talks about the CEO being a lonely position. There's nobody you can talk to and all that stuff. And that, I think, could apply if you're stepping into a role that you're not ready for, where you think you have something to prove and you're worried about making mistakes. And so you're worried about really sharing and being open and transparent and authentic with your colleagues and peers, both up to the board, but also within the management team. So if you're worried and concerned and not ready, then yes, it can be very lonely. But in the situation that I'm in, I'm very fortunate in that sense that I've gotten to this post relatively late in my own career, that I feel very different about it. I feel, that the support I get and I can get from the members on my management team, that I am getting from the members of the board, Eric and everybody really who is on our board, we're all coming from the place of wanting to get the best and making the best impact on the company we can. And realizing that even if sometimes people have opposite views, right? This is not because, there's any kind of hidden agenda, right? We all want the same thing, and picking up the input and sharing it and being open and transparent with what I think needs to happen and working with people in that manner creates that sense of support and connection that I think is really important to be successful in the role. And I definitely get that from my colleagues and from everybody else who's involved in the company.
Yeah. So I'm going to flip the perspective, because we've been talking parallel, peers, management team, board, and to look within the organization. As you now have sat in this seat for a few months, what is it? And for just full disclosure, I asked Eric this exact question in our podcast.
Look good.
So
good.
If I was to go to them and ask them, what do you need most from Matthias? What is your assessment of what they need most from you?
Good question. I'm just trying to sort of collect my thoughts, because I think it's it really, and it is different depending on the type of leader that you have in an organization, right? And it goes back to sort of the need to the imperative really to be authentic and transparent. And so the way I see my role is making sure that we are collectively as a team arriving at a plan for what we need to do with the company. So shaping the strategy of the company. And again, people do it differently. My approach is to really take advantage of the collective brain power that we have, bring it all together, having these conversations. We're having quarterly management meetings in person, even though a lot of the work that we're nowadays doing is on Zoom. But for these types of conversations, we really want to be sitting together and having the time to talk things through. And so we're using that time to really come up with a plan and a strategy. And it's really taking the input and helping shape that plan that in the end, everybody believes that, yes, that's the best thing we can do, the best version of the company we can get to, with the means that we have. And that's sort of what I believe people are looking for me to do, is really bring everybody together and help shape that direction, and ultimately get to a point to guide everybody to an outcome with that we can all support. And that's the role. It's very much I see this as a coach, really, as a, I'm from Switzerland, so soccer, football is been sort of the game that I grew up with. It's also, I've been, when my kids were younger, I was coaching their soccer teams here, and then it's looking at what we have in the people, right? Draw out the best that we have, create that sense of unity and purpose, and then point them in the right direction, and then everybody, moves the team forward and ultimately scores. And that's the role that I have as a CEO, I believe, and that's the role that I play, and I hope that's what they are looking for. And so based on the interactions I have, I think we're in a good spot.
Yeah, it's you can, I won't tell you what Eric said. I'll share his episode. It wasn't so dissimilar, but maintaining the pulse of what matters to the rank and file, individual contributors, first level, second level managers. In my experience as a coach, I'm surprised often how quickly CEOs and senior leaders forget what it was like to be on the front lines. That not always. Many leaders have a clear remembrance of what it was like to be a scientist or a lawyer or a QA person, QC person, just getting started. What do you remember as being at again, I'll call it rank and file, a contributor within the organization? What do you remember about being in those lower level seats that impacts how you lead now that you are at a senior level?
Right. I think it goes all the way back to my first job I had. So I was in the legal department in Switzerland in the big pharma company. And my first boss there was he was very experienced, a very nice person, very gentlemanly, didn't need to be loud or anything, but he had that sense of just respect. And he saw himself more of a mentor to the people in his team than being the boss who could tell people what to do. And I think that really shaped the entirety of my professional career. And what I really appreciated in that situation is being taken along, learning on the job, having the cover from somebody senior coming along and leading it until I was ready to step up. And I think that's the type of leadership that I still try to apply in terms of interacting with my direct reports. But it's just that sense of respect, right? You're not there to do a job and you just do your job and forget about everything else. Is giving people the bigger picture so that they can actually do their job more effectively. And I think that's really important. And that, even though we're a relatively small company, it is important to continue to interact with people. And we have on a fairly regular basis these town hall meetings and getting together in different ways to really continue to provide the opportunity for people to ask questions, right, and engage and understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, because then that helps them do their job better. And that's, I think, really important. And that I've gotten that from like the very beginning of my career.
Yeah, it's such just a cool reflection, because I think about me 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, and what I wanted. And I think it's almost exactly what you said. I wanted mentorship. I wanted direction. I wanted to feel that I was respected. not pandered to. So I really resonate with what you remember you needed and what you got, and how that has shaped, as you said, how that has shaped almost your entire career.
Yeah, it's pure coincidence. I was just lucky, I guess, to have had the opportunity to start in that manner. And it's really important, because ultimately, right, the goal I've had in all the roles I had is ultimately to make myself superfluous, because everybody was able to do what needed to be done. And that's obviously in the CEO job a little less applicable, but I still view it in the same way, right? In the end, we need to have a management team that works well together, that can step up, in situations and take ownership and leadership without me having to be there every step of the way and telling people what to do. And only that way can we be truly effective, impactful, and successful. It can't all just roll up and everybody waits for the CEO to pronounce now what needs to happen, right? That's not an effective organization. So having that environment where people are able to and feel free to step up and take responsibility and be accountable for something, I think that's the goal, and I think that's the kind of environment we're also continuing to build within Gain.
The podcast is called Conversations Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. And I'm wondering, Matthias, if there's a conversation that you wish more people were having, people in your seat, CEO or in the C-suite, if there was a conversation that you don't see happening, but you wish was happening more out among your peers, what would that be?
I think it's, from my perspective, less of a sort of a conversation that needs to be happening that's not happening. It's more the approach, how we're working, within the company, and how we're working with people who are outside the company. And to me, the way the work we can be most impactful as a company and as an industry is not viewing each other as competition, but we're all ultimately trying to do the same thing, right? And if one company wins, there's an opportunity for other companies to win as well. And so having a more open exchange, a transparent and frank exchange, right? We're not giving away trade secrets or anything like that, but viewing each other as part of a bigger thing, right? We're not just, as an individual in a company, we're part of a much larger organization, and together we're able to accomplish incredible things. We had this an all-company offsite retreat in the summer, and we're driving back from the event that we had on the mountain in Switzerland, and we're sitting there, there's like 30 people in the bus, and I thought, wow, this is the group of people that took the platform, created 9 pipeline programs, took the lead program all the way into close to being in the clinic. We're getting into the clinic next year with a potentially disease-modifying therapy for Parkinson's disease. It's like, these are the people who did this, right? 30 people. It's incredible what is possible when people are pulling together, even as a small group. And I think together as an industry and with other companies, there is some competition, right? But in the end, right, if the industry does well, everybody does well. And I think that creating more of a support, even how we interact between us as companies, we're part of a larger thing, which is the biotech industry that ultimately brings, cures to patients. And that's what we all want. And that's the common purpose that we all share, and being more open with each other and supportive, as opposed to trying to angle for a specific advantage in a particular interaction, I think would really advance the entire field and the industry.
I love that. I love the picture of when you described the bus with what's possible with those 30, what has been possible with those 30-ish people, and then to take that and even out of a broader perspective of the industry, if that's possible here, what might be possible if
Right.
small, medium, large, if all of these companies that are working on similar things could collaborate instead of compete,
Right.
what might be possible? It's actually mind-blowing.
Yeah. And the great thing is now, that's what I love about being in the role, is I have now the ability to, further that what I just described in the way we as a company interact with other companies in the field. And I think people appreciate that, right? Because ultimately, on an individual basis, people come into the biotech industry maybe by chance, but they stay in it because they get that sense of intrinsic motivation of being, even if it's a small piece, we're a part of something much larger, and that the ultimate purpose is not self-serving, but it's very altruistic really, in terms of creating cures for diseases that are currently not treated. And that's why we're doing it. And I think ultimately, generally the disposition is there. We just need to create that in our interactions with our colleagues in other companies, continue to propagate that sense of cooperation versus competition.
Yeah. As a final question for our time together this afternoon, if you could go back and have a conversation with a younger you, and you could pull him aside and speak into his life, knowing what you know today, what would you want to say to him?
It's a bit of a mindset. I've been fortunate in that where I am today, we talked about it before. I feel very comfortable in terms of what I need to do. I know I can do it, and that sense of assurance has built up over time. I think I would probably tell myself to be more patient because I guess some of it that drove me to being where I am is because I wasn't patient. I was pushing and pushing and really pushing myself to get to the point. But it's really, things take time, right? Be patient, get your experience, and take advantage of opportunities, and don't stress out about the little things. Right? Don't get held up about. There's so many instances now that you ask the question, I'm thinking back, it's like, why was I worried about that? Right? It's like, let's keep the plan in mind, the big picture, right? What are we doing? What am I doing? Why am I doing it? What do I want to do next? Really, don't sweat the little stuff, I guess, is the very sage advice that many people have already given as well.
It strikes me, though, while you might have some regrets about where you weren't as patient, but it just strikes me that also that way of being really served you quite well, and it's what got you today to where you are today. And as you had said, it's not what you need now. What you need now is to slow down, or to allow things around you to slow down, to not stress, to not have to prove something. So it just hits me that maybe you could have been more patient, but I don't know that I'd be talking to the Matthias I am today had he not been a little.
It's a fair point, yes. It is. I mean, ultimately, I think patience aside, what ultimately is required is just put in the work, right? And that, it takes a lot of hard work and applying yourself. And I keep telling that also to my children, right? It's like it's the effort. The brains only can take you so far. The rest is all effort. And I think that's that's something I've tried to impart on my own children and people early in their careers. That I think is an important aspect. But ultimately, right, if you have the right environment and the mentors around you, then it really lets you flourish in pretty much any environment.
Matthias, this has been such a fun conversation. I really appreciate your heart and just showing up, playing full out with some curveball type questions that I wasn't even anticipating. So really appreciate it. If people are listening and they want to learn more about you or Gain, where can they go?
Well, easiest probably is about Gain, it's gaintherapeutics.com is our website. We have a contact email there. And if there's any listeners who feel inspired or want to learn more about sort of career development and so forth, happy to also just pick up the email directly, and that would be malder@gaintherapeutics.com.
Great. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes. All the best. We're here at the doorstep of Thanksgiving. I'm grateful for you and wish you and your family all the best for the holiday season.
Thank you very much. And same to you. I very much enjoyed our conversation. Look forward to continuing to stay in touch here.
Yeah.